Hello guys, how are you?
I'm Hardeep Singh. Welcome back to your own YouTube channel. IELTS updates and recent exams. For more updates related to recent IELTS exam writing test topics, listening, reading, practice test, and speaking, you got guesswork. Please, guys, participate in everyday listening and reading practice test to achieve your desired band score in your actual IELTS exam. Please hit the like and subscribe button. Press the bell icon for the upcoming notifications. Don't forget like, subscribe and share my YouTube channel and my Facebook page, IELTS updates and recent exams.
Part 1.
First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 6. Now listen and answer questions 1 to 6.
So, what was it like in your school then, Lynn?
Well, South African schools are very different from schools in Australia. For a start, children don't start their schooling until they are 7, quite a bit later than schools in Australia. What about New Zealand, Gail?
We're more like Australia. I can't believe children don't go to school until they are 7. When do the parents get any free time?
Well, there's still the availability of kindergartens or play schools. It's just that formal education doesn't start until later. I don't think it's such a good idea for children to have to be too academic at such a young age. They should be able to just enjoy themselves.
Well, yeah, but the first school children go to isn't really very academic. It's just an opportunity for children to learn a few basic social skills by playing and learning with other children.
Yes, I'd agree with that.
I guess being so close, Australian and New Zealand schools must be similar then.
Well, I suppose they do share a lot of similarities, but there are also some differences. For example, children in New Zealand go through intermediate school, but in Australia there's only high school. That's right, isn't it, Pat?
Yeah, I think so. What about South Africa, Lynn? Do you have an intermediate or high school?
Oh, high school.
And now the difference between Australian and New Zealand education is that although both countries have state schools and private schools, our private schools are very often run by religious groups, whereas New Zealand schools are secular.
That's not true. There are quite a few religious schools in New Zealand.
Oh, okay, maybe we are similar.
Only a few South African schools have any religious connection, so I guess we're different. Most people go to state schools. Pat, is it true that some people from your country don't have to go to school at all?
Well, that's partly true. Because of the geography of Australia, there are a lot of children who do not have access to schools, at least on a regular basis. Instead, they have a form of correspondence education, where the lessons are actually on the radio and the students send their work in by post. That way they get a lot of what they would if they were in the classroom, apart from the interaction.
In New Zealand, not all students have to go to school either. Some parents have opted for homeschooling.
Oh, is that like correspondence teaching? We don't really have that.
Well, we do have correspondence schools, but homeschooling is different. With homeschooling, the parents teach the children and set them homework. They have to present a syllabus to their local education authority before they can do that, but it is becoming a more popular choice for some parents. I suppose it also suits parents' own commitments. I mean, they don't have to worry about collecting their children from school, and they can always teach over the weekend or in the evening if they want to.
Is the school day normally quite long then?
Not in New Zealand, but I think it can be in Australia.
Yeah, that's right. I think Australia is unusual in that there are extracurricular activities which you have to go to.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 7 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 7 to 10.
These are normally sport activities, but there are a few other options.
We have activities after school for any student that is interested, but they aren't compulsory. What about in New Zealand, Gail?
I had to do some sport every week. I didn't really like it, but it was part of the school days, so I guess that's not so bad. Anyway, I spent 2 years at boarding school, so things were a little different.
Boarding school? What was that like?
Well, the thing I remember most about it was the strict dress code. There were restrictions on everything. You had to wear a school uniform almost all of the time, and it had to be cleaned and ironed. The length of your skirt had to be no less than 1 inch above your knees when kneeling down. Sometimes we used to go out on school trips or just at weekends with a few friends, but whenever we were outside the school we had to wear a hat. There was one teacher who always used to give me extra homework because my socks weren't pulled up, and that was in the school late in the evening. I suppose it wasn't that bad, but at the time it felt like a prison. I kept getting into trouble for something. Most of the time I forgot something, normally my school badge. We had to wear that all the time, in the school and out, because it had our house colours on it.
Wow, that doesn't sound like much fun.
No, but it was a good education, I suppose.
That is the end of part 1.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 2.
You will hear a student, Alex, asking his tutor for advice about essay writing.
First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 17. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 17.
Hi, Alex. Come in. I gather you wanted some help with writing essays.
Yes, I'm finding this first term difficult, and I'm worried about the assignments we have to do for January.
Well, let me see if I can help. You shouldn't panic about it, because essay writing is a very straightforward process, really. What it involves is organising the information that you want to include. You shouldn't have more than you can easily manage within the word count. Make sure you haven't got too much or anything irrelevant. You need to look at that and work out what you need and what you don't need before you start. And then you just have to think about how you're going to put forward your argument.
Oh, that sounds very straightforward when you put it like that. But I'm worried I haven't got the necessary skills for writing an effective essay because English is my second language.
Well, perhaps you misunderstand the skills you need. You need to be able to analyse your data, and then I would say the skills of interpretation and expressing yourself are important. Perhaps it's this last one that bothers you, but the more essays you write, the more you will develop these skills.
Yes, and I don't quite know how to improve at that. Though, as you say, I know practice will help. And I need to make sure I've got everything ready before I start.
Yes. What is vital to good essay writing is preparation. So make sure you build in enough time to do the research you need.
Are there any other sources I can use to help me with essays?
Yes. You should go to the library and look through the reference section, because there are books that focus on the style we use in academic writing, and those will help you a lot. The other thing that you should think about is what happens when you've actually written your essay. Too many students just complete their work and hand it in, whereas what you should be doing is making sure that you edit it as thoroughly as possible.
Oh, yes, that's a good idea. Then I'd pick up any mistakes and also see if it reads logically.
Exactly. The other thing is, again, what a lot of students do is get their essays back, look at the marks, then just file it away. They don't realise that if they checked it through and looked at what the tutor had written, then they can learn from their old essays.
Yeah, I can see that's a good idea.
So, is that okay? You can always come back to me.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 18 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 18 to 20.
Actually, there were a couple of other things I wanted to ask you about essay writing. I had a few thoughts of my own about what I should do, such as really taking good notes when I'm reading, because that helps, doesn't it?
I think it improves your knowledge rather than your actual writing. But one tip I can give you is to try and not read too much. Otherwise, you end up including irrelevant material in your essay. Remember to stay on task.
Yes. Sometimes I have problems interpreting the questions correctly, or the whole question seems overwhelming to me. What I try to do is highlight the key parts and divide it into smaller chunks so I can manage it.
Well, you might find it useful to break it down even further by making sure you understand all the words perfectly before you start. Things like assess or comment and such like.
Yes, I see.
Sometimes, after an objective analysis, the question actually asks you for a subjective opinion, but you must remember to support your arguments if that's the case. One final comment I can make is about using your own words. You must try to do this as far as possible. You're expected to summarise what you've read, not just string together a list of quotations. In fact, you shouldn't have too many. Just use them where it's really important.
Okay, thanks.
Do you read other students' essays when you've finished?
No. Why? Is that a good idea?
Well, you can confuse each other, so I'd advise against it. But it's up to you.
Okay. Thanks very much for your time.
The end of part 2.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 3.
You will hear a conversation between an academic advisor and a student asking for information about a particular subject that she wants to study. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 26. Listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 26. Come in and take a seat.
Thank you.
Now, You've made an appointment to see me with regard to one of the papers you want to enrol in next semester.
Yes, that's right. It's the Globalization and Educational Change paper, GEC 692.
Ah, well, I know the one you mean, but all the code numbers are going to change next semester, so although the course name will stay the same, the code will be ED995. Not that you have to worry about that.
But the content will be the same, right?
Oh, yes, to a large extent. The objectives are still to provide you with the skills and knowledge for analysing the challenges that globalisation poses for education.
Yes, that's what I'm really interested in. The future of education. Not where we are now, but where we're heading.
Well, you'll most likely enjoy the course because it'll give you the opportunity not just to explore, but also to document the advancement of new educational developments.
And there'll be quite a lot of analysis involved.
Yes, obviously. But once you've examined how education has been affected by cultural values and socio-economic structures, you'll go on to debate the pros and cons of the restructuring of public education in view of rapid globalization.
I see, but when you say public education, do you mean worldwide?
No. That would be far too large an undertaking for just one paper. You'd probably choose to work with the education system within your own state or country.
Sounds interesting, but isn't it a bit restrictive?
Not at all. From there, you'd move on to explore the impact of internationalization on curriculum diversity in both developing and developed countries. Have you had a chance to look at the assessment criteria yet?
Actually, I have, and it makes me a bit nervous just thinking about it.
Why's that?
Well, I see that the first assignment starts with an illustrated PowerPoint presentation to the rest of the class. I've never done one before.
No need to worry. You can get help with that. Anyway, this presentation isn't graded. It's what we call a formative assessment. The feedback you get will help you to finalise the written review.
That's a review of those academic articles in the first part of the reading list, right?
Yes, but you only have to choose 5 of them. That first assignment is worth 30%.
And the second assignment?
There are 2 parts to that also, and both are graded. 20 marks will go towards your participation in a seminar, and then there's a 5,000-word essay, which will be graded out of 50.
Thanks.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 27 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 27 to 30. Is there anything else I can help you with?
Yes. The reading list is quite long. Where do you think I should start?
Well, I'd suggest you leave the articles until the semester is underway, but a good preparation would be to look at some of the major texts. These ones here.
In any particular order?
You could start with this one by Tower, here at the bottom of the page.
Sorry, who?
Tower. T-O-W-E-R. 2007. Comparative Education. That should give you a good basis. Then move on to Eliot. Educational Issues of the New Millennium. But be sure to get the 2008 edition, not the original 1998 edition, because so much has changed since 1998. The new edition has extensive revisions and a lot of new material.
OK, so that's Tower first, then Eliot. I think I could handle a couple more over the summer break.
Well, in that case, Look for Brown's Education and Globalization, published in 2009. Actually, there are quite a few books by Brown, but I'd start with that one and leave his others till much later. And I'd also really recommend this one here, Globalization and Knowledge Policy by York, published quite recently, in fact, 2010.
The end of part 3.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 4.
We'll hear a lecture on immunity and immunization. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40. Good afternoon, and thank you for your warm welcome. This will be the first talk in a series of 5 on health interventions, protection and prevention. Could I start by asking for a show of hands? How many of you have had a flu vaccination at the beginning of winter? I thought so. You young ones always think you're indestructible. Well, as you are no doubt aware, disease-spreading germs or pathogens are everywhere. On a daily basis, the human body has to ward off attacks by various harmful bacteria and viruses. A healthy body has a good defense system against many of these germs, but the defense only operates well against microorganisms that it has already encountered, in which case it is said to be immune. There are 2 ways in which humans acquire natural immunity. Actively, when a person has first suffered and then recovered from an illness, and passively, when ready-made protection is transferred into the body, for example, from the maternal blood via the umbilical cord to an unborn child, or through breast milk. Now, artificially acquired immunity can help the body to fight disease, so we can use active immunization as a preventative measure. This is when a person is vaccinated against an illness by injection or oral ingestion of a tiny amount of weakened or inactive germs, not enough to actually cause him or her to contract the illness, but sufficient for the body's defense system to recognize and respond to the threat by forming antibodies. Intervention using passive immunization, on the other hand, is a method of curing an illness after it is too late for prevention. It is less effective than active immunization and takes longer to work. It is used when the body has already been invaded by bacteria and the person is ill. In this case, there is no time for the body to make antibodies of its own, so proteins, usually taken from the blood of animals, are injected to equip the patient with the essential antibodies to combat the particular illness. Let's have a quick look at a bit of history. The discovery of vaccination to boost the body's immune system by making it sensitive to particular disease-causing bacteria was made by an 18th century English doctor called Edward Jenner. He noticed that survivors of smallpox, a common but extremely dangerous disease, never contracted the disease a second time. In other words, they were immune. He studied a similar disease in cows called cowpox and realized that people in contact with the infected cows became ill with symptoms resembling smallpox. However, this disease was quite mild by comparison, and those who contracted cowpox were then immune to smallpox. He conducted an experiment by injecting a child with a small amount of pus taken from a cowpox pustule. The child subsequently became ill, but soon recovered. Later, he injected the child with pus from a smallpox pustule, and the child did not get sick. He had developed immunity to the more dangerous disease. The antibodies produced to fight the cowpox bacteria had been able to fight off the smallpox bacteria. What are antibodies? Well, antibodies are made by white blood cells called B lymphocytes, and this is done in response to the presence of antigens, or other bacterial toxins, which have been released by the microorganisms, what we commonly refer to as germs, that have invaded the body. These Y-shaped antibodies, or you can think of them as antitoxins, may stop the toxins or repair the damage they have done by what is known as the antigen-antibody reaction, which takes place within the plasma of the blood. A correct antibody, for that disease, clings to a particular antigen in order to render it harmless. Large numbers of these pairs clump together to form a bigger unit. This is called agglutination and is able to be seen by the naked eye, which is very helpful for doctors and other specialists to determine which illnesses a patient is immune to. Inoculation or active vaccination can protect people from serious diseases. The vaccine may make a person feel unwell for a few days, when the immune system starts to produce antibodies to match the introduced antigen. This is called a primary reaction. If that particular antigen should ever enter the body again later, a secondary reaction takes place. The body is then able to produce large numbers of corresponding antibodies within a short time, so the invading antigens are quickly wiped out, without the person suffering any harm from the disease.
That is the end of part 4.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
So guys, don't forget like, subscribe and share my YouTube channel and my Facebook page. IELTS updates and recent exams. For more updates related to recent IELTS exam writing test topics, listening, reading, practice test and speaking, you got guesswork. Please guys, participate in everyday new IELTS listening and reading practice tests to achieve your desired band score in your actual IELTS exam. For more IELTS material, visit my official website www.ieltsupdatesandrecentexams.com. The link is given below in the description. If you need PDF files of latest IELTS material, then please join my Telegram channel. So guys, please write your score below the comment section. Again, thanks for listening. God bless you all guys. Stay tuned, stay safe.